when we were first thinking about this panel, NFT prices were higher, is what I would say. And I wanted to start by reading from the statement that the CEO of OpenSea put out when they had to let go 20% of their team just a few days ago. And there's one thing in here that I want to pull out because I think it's very relevant to what we're all going to talk about, and it's this. During this winter, I expect we'll see an explosion in innovation and utility across NFTs. With the hard but important changes that we made today, we're in an even better position to capture what will soon become the largest market on the planet. Now is our time to build. Winter is our time to build. I highlighted the words, innovation and utility, because I feel like there's certainly a perception, perhaps a misperception, depends on your perspective, that all NFTs are overvalued pictures of apes, or things that celebrities will shill on their Instagrams and then deny later. And what we're hoping to achieve with this panel is more of a discussion around the real potential possibility of what we like to say the underlying technology, but also actual use cases. And so I want to start with you, Helen. One of the perhaps stranger things to happen in the first couple of days after Russia invaded Ukraine, I bet you weren't expecting that segue, after Russia invaded Ukraine was this outpouring of crypto philanthropy that ultimately resulted in several hundreds of millions of dollars being raised to support the state of Ukraine, but also their soldiers and also their populace, to the extent that Ukraine's digital minister was like talking about, hey, we're going to mint and sell our own NFT. And the charitable arm of Binance was one of the entities that was very present in all of those conversations. Can you talk more about what actually crypto philanthropy is, and not just in like the Sam Bankman-Fried way?
Fantastic. Maybe I give you a quick example first. Maybe I ask you a question to start with.
Oh no.
Today, if you want to donate $100 to somebody, let's say in Ukraine or Africa, give me a number. How much do you think out of your $100 will be earned in the hand of the beneficiaries?
Depending
in the existing non-crypto system?
Probably 90 of that.
25%.
Okay, that's worse.
We're not even talking about corruption.
Right.
So that's the reality. Why? Because actually sometimes in order to donate 100,000, people have to pay 200,000 to PricewaterhouseCoopers on auditing fee. There's a lot of actually transaction cost is being involved. This is why technology actually add values into this, because crypto fundamentally is transparency and is trackable. Today, 4 years ago when we started Binance Charity, we were doing project in Africa, doing lunches. Out of the $100 we donate, 93% of them turn into the food on children's plate. Mm-hmm. The other 7% are the local costs. Everything is actually transparent. We are the only a charity which had zero administration fees. It's not only we're saying it, everything's trackable, transparent. You can all check it on the blockchain. So this is why technology can bring in real values into the society. And talking about in Ukraine, it's exactly the same thing. Today, if a lot of people, if you only want to donate $5, $10, it's not even possible. Nobody even accepts your $5 or $10. One of the things we worked with the United Nations to offer is the refugee crypto card. Offer them a crypto ID, and then they actually they can receive cryptos from even $1. Everything around the world.
I want to ask you about that, because donating $5 in crypto can also cost you $5 in crypto, right? Like there are still significant fees and complexity for a lot of folks associated with these things. What has to change about the ecosystem in order to make what you're describing more of a reality?
Infrastructure and education are the two most important fundamentals. I think when we were doing the project, even in Africa, today we are talking about, in the traditional world, we're talking about financial inclusions for generations. Even we're looking at what actually happened for the third industrial revolution, which is internet-based. The world didn't become a better place. 1% of the population is holding 90% of the global wealth. This is actually why blockchain is so popular, because people believe with the fourth industrial revolution that the financial system is going to change, because we are going to get rid of a lot of more efficiency, and also get rid of a lot of the intermediaries. This is why blockchain is going to play a far more important role in the society to achieve the final free transfer of values. And it is in this whole process, we're talking about currently in the existing old traditional financial infrastructure, people has been excluded because it's too expensive even include them into having even opening banks. But with blockchain and crypto, we're able to do projects to empowering the bottom billion people because it's far more cheaper. We can do remittances. When we were doing project in Africa, we're seeing people using our platform doing remittances because they don't want to pay 15% to Western unions. And then also some of their relatives probably is not even in the capital city of certain African countries. They don't want to use a broker taking for another week to getting the money. With crypto, everything is possible.
Everything is possible, everything is not yet practical. And I want to talk to somebody who spends a lot of time in like the practical elements of this space. So pplpleasr, you've had an interesting career. When we were talking in the green room, you said that one of the things you've really done is try to push the boundaries of crypto and art. And in your most recent project, Shibuya, you had a very interesting Medium post where you're basically like, well, most of this is like speculation and none of it makes sense and it's not sustainable long term. However, here are the interesting things. What for you are those actually interesting things in an environment, perhaps less right now, but in an environment where there was so much kind of like speculative activity?
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be naive to sort of hone in on the non-speculative parts because I think part of the charm of crypto is that it is speculative, right? But yeah, personally, I've felt that the NFT space for the past year and a half at least has been more stagnant on just sort of speculative assets and focusing on floor prices and I feel like Bill Gates got a lot of flack from the NFT community for saying this, but I actually agree with him, which is that it's based on the greater fool's theory currently, right? It's all about who's the next person who's going to buy this NFT, and then the price goes up. But the floor price that you're seeing is not actually what every asset is worth, because once somebody sells, then the floor price goes down. So just because you have the asset doesn't mean that you have actually that much Ethereum in your wallet or value. And so this really got me thinking, why have we created a culture where everyone is so obsessed with this floor price when the wonderful use of blockchain technology can be utilized for much more? And part of so Shibuya is kind of like a decentralized Netflix/Kickstarter
So just to translate that in practice, the example that you used in that post was you are creating a story. That story might have 2 arcs. Somebody could choose to back one arc versus another arc by making like decisions on a blockchain by saying, I'm going to buy an NFT that's for door number 1. Somebody else might buy an NFT for door number 2, and then they can like fight it out creatively that way.
Yeah. And so, in this way, I think the community feels like not only are they financially supporting the creation of this IP, but also that they have a say in where the direction is going. It makes it more sort of inclusive and collaborative. And this sort of goes back to last summer where I helped crowdfund the Ethereum documentary by selling a series of NFTs, and then we raised over $2 million in 48 hours. And just like that, the documentary was funded. And if anybody has ever tried to fundraise in the film industry or anything, you would know that it's usually a multi-year long process. And similar to what Helen was saying, there's all this paperwork and bank wires and everything that's involved. And so this is a wonderful opportunity that crypto can open up for us. And sort of what I've been more focused on is trying to drive that value back to a lot more creators and using this technology of building a platform to make it accessible to more people, because not everybody knows how to code smart contracts in the blockchain, right? So yeah, I think that this is something that I'm personally more interested in, and I definitely feel like more people will start to see this sort of value as we're headed towards a more bear market and people are focusing on things beyond just speculation.
So one of the polls that we did on Twitter, we asked the question, what would have to change about NFTs to kind of like bring them back? And one of the things that people identified was security features, which is to say like not constantly getting hacked, not having the verified Instagram accounts of Bored Ape be compromised and then people connect their wallets to it and lose all their NFTs, or otherwise engage in phishing scams. And I raised that because everything that you all are describing is operating in like this, almost like a countervailing wind of an environment where you're like, here's a really interesting idea for philanthropy, here's a really interesting idea for creative fundraising, and then a bunch of people are there like, what if we made your lives really difficult? How are you, and Avery, I'd love to get your kind of perspective on this. Like, what are the kinds of things that you are seeing that is countering those difficulties? Like, you work at Vayner, which is just rebranded. You're now Vayner3, as in Web3. So this is clearly something that you are fully embracing. Like, despite these very real and very significant challenges, whether it is speculative frenzy into bear markets or fairly legitimate user experience and security concerns, why are you optimistic about it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So about a year and a half ago, we started at Vayner, led by Gary Vaynerchuk. We started to get really into the world of NFTs, both from a collector perspective, launching Gary's project, which is called VFriends, and then launching Vayner NFT, which is a company that I run and just rebranded to Vayner3. And the reason that we continue to be extremely optimistic and excited about this space is we believe that the consumer blockchain is going to revolutionize not just the next iteration of the internet, but the next iteration of consumer behavior. We've talked about art, we've talked about philanthropy being two sort of immediate use cases which have propelled the early wave of NFTs. I think gaming and sports and collectibles kind of is included in some of the examples of things that have already hit, like People Pleaser's work selling for 7 figures and incredible donations happening through the philanthropic crypto community. But beyond that, there's a lot more that NFTs can be. As humans, we spend a tremendous amount of our time on digital devices and digital screens, and that number is only going up, up, up. But people don't actually own things in their digital experiences. Maybe some of your kids play Roblox and you give them Robux for their birthdays or something like that. So that's or you're into gaming and skins, and those are examples where you can start to pay money for things digitally and for those digital experiences, but it's not interoperable. Like, you have your Roblox within your existing, that ecosystem. You can't take it with you to Meta. You can't take it with you to Fortnite. Those are all different experiences. And what we think is that NFTs are really the tip of the spear for the broader Web3 ecosystem. NFTs are something that people can understand immediately. They understand a piece of art. They understand a digital collectible. They understand the concepts of rarity. And that then sort of opens up the broader ecosystem of metaverse and blockchain and crypto, which we think is going to be really fundamental in the next iteration of how consumers use the internet. With that said, in the last 18 months, it's been a lot about speculation and hype and flipping and trading, and there's been a ton of activity in that space that's cooled off tremendously in the past couple of weeks. We actually think that's healthy for the space to sort of take out some of that over-financialization that scares away mainstream consumers, makes them think that crypto is incredibly speculative and risky and they're going to get hacked. Because when you look at the broader ecosystem, even within NFTs, there are, for example, Tezos and for example, what Dapper has built, offer solutions that are not as risky as sort of Ethereum mainnet super expensive NFTs. That's what grabs the headlines, but the reality is that is going to be a tiny fraction of the total user base of how people interact with NFTs in the future.
So, People Pleaser, I want to get back to this idea of art, because art markets are also prone to speculative frenzy of different kinds. How are you finding, both as an artist but somebody who's working on art funding, the differences between the traditional fine art markets and this sort of Web3 ecosystem in which you're increasingly operating?
Well, I think, first of all, I am mostly, all of my background is digital. Even before crypto and NFTs, I was working as a digital artist for various Hollywood post-production films. And so I can't comment too much on the traditional art market because I'm not actually part of that world. But what's interesting is that through NFTs and crypto, like the sort of higher tier auction houses like Sotheby's and Christie's are all now, sort of very interested in this space. And it's created this conversion of digital artists and traditional art, which I think, I just think that, in the past, maybe there has been some kind of stigma against digital art where people just don't see it as real art. And now, I think there's sort of more acceptance to it, because at the end of the day, art is subjective and it's all about just expressing yourself through different mediums, right? And so people with digital art just do it on a computer versus in the traditional art market. In terms of the speculation parts, I think that's just always going to be part of something that is inherently subjective. It's very, very hard to,
What makes an ape beautiful?
Exactly. But What I personally find interesting, and this is just a personal passion of mine, is the concept of storytelling, and you can do that through digital art or traditional art. And for example, things like film, you can release it to the world and then have the audience sort of rate it, and then in that case, you can say that it's technically less subjective than something that's being sort of speculated or praised behind closed doors, and that's what I find really interesting about this space.
Helen, one of the things that you said about this, the idea of philanthropy is trying to make it easier than doing it traditionally. When we were reporting on the first sort of wave of crypto donations, there were definitely people who were active in the crypto ecosystem, had no problem figuring out, okay, that's the Ukrainian wallet, we verified it, we're going to send it, it's fine. There were people coming in because they wanted to give money that way. What about the on-ramp, as it were, right? Like, what about the thing that takes somebody from, I've seen an NFT, to I want to become an active person in this ecosystem? What about philanthropy have you found can help people consider this asset class differently in the way that, as People Pleaser is describing, it's working for some folks who come at it from a more visual or artistic perspective?
I think on the on-ramp is very much depending on the regulation. Actually, I built the Binance fiat on-ramp globally for 4 years. And then recently also working with the European government, getting our 3 registrations. I wanted to say, actually, I'm finding in Europe, actually, the government, the leaders really understand the impact of actual blockchain. It's all really creating value to the society. So it's actually very welcome for the on-ramp support, for the charity. But even going back to the first question you just asked Emily, I think because I also built the Binance NFT platform, I can tell you how the traditional model and how the current model. I think in terms of fundraising, the distribution of profit is very different. Traditionally, if I'm an artist, I want to sell my art. I need to find an art gallery committing 50% of my next 10 years earnings, and then make sure they accept me, and then there's a potential maybe I becoming to be known. So that's actually a very difficult journey. I mean, the probability of successful is also very, very small. But today with NFT is very different. For example, in Binance, when we build a centralized platform, we only charge 1% of the fee as a platform. Everybody, you can exhibit art, in there. And actually, it's not Binance determining the price of your art. It's actually the market drives of the art. We've got Latin American artists. We've got somebody like a 20-year-old. He was struggling to feed himself like the street artist. And then his art went to our platform at the beginning $100, and then $1,000 and $10,000. He actually earned a lot of money. You know what happened with these young people? When he earned the money, he actually didn't go to buy a car. He didn't go to buy any house. He actually set up a local school in Latin America. He wanted to teach more kids actually to learn how to use NFT because he realized how NFT changed his life. So in my opinion, this is lowering the barrier for artists entering into the world, and also it's going to benefit the people who appreciate art. This is a technological renaissance. So the whole fundraising actually really is completely different distribution model.
This is an interesting perspective on the inherent altruism of crypto, which is perhaps not supported by some of the other conversations we've had on the stage today. But I do find that, and Avery, I want to ask you this, because the history of Vayner is really about community, right? So when Gary Vaynerchuk was wine, and then he had a media agency and was doing community management, whatever the sort of the platform through which he's expressing his various ideas, there's always been this idea of an ecosystem, a community, a sense of solidarity for a particular in-group. What about that are you seeing or is infusing, as it were, Vayner3? Because what I'm hearing from both Helen and People Pleaser is this idea of doing something or participating in something bigger than you, whatever the financial incentives might be.
That's a very astute observation, that community has been critical to Vayner's journey over the last 12 years of having the VaynerX company. And I think that what you're also getting at is cultural relevance. It's where people are actually paying attention is where we've structured a lot of our business opportunity. And certainly without a doubt, there's a community around sort of crypto traders, and there's obviously varying levels of savviness within there. There's also a community around NFT collectors, people who collect NFTs, of course, some for sort of trading and that hobbyist activity, some because they're passionate around certain groups of artists or certain groups of intellectual property owners, whether we're talking about Nickelodeon or we're talking about MLB or we're talking about Gary V's VFriends. There are communities around each of these programs, and what I think is different this time around versus what we saw in Web 2, which was the fostering of a community on social media and enabling people to communicate globally across the world with someone they may have never met, having a direct one-to-one communication with a brand or a celebrity that they like, or an athlete. This time, when you participate in this NFT ecosystem, you actually have aligned incentives. Back to the example that Helen was just giving for that Latin American artist, if that Latin American artist had, had a group of collectors, they would probably interact with them at different art shows, even if they were very successful. And the first pieces would have sold for 100, then 1,000, then 10,000. But if that first Genesis piece that originally sold for 100 was selling for $1 million, that Latin American artist doesn't benefit from that. And NFTs unlock this ability for collectors and creators to have aligned incentives. And of course, that strengthens the bonds of a community of people who are passionate around a specific subject or hobby. Tokenized hobbyism is going to be something that we increasingly see.
That is a very interesting
coming up like more and more, whether you're really into a game or you're really into an artist, a group of collectors having a forum to engage and all sort of being in the wave together of benefiting from appreciation or depreciation, as the case may be. I think that this is a really interesting use case for that community to actually have aligned financial incentives in the future.
I actually want to echo that. I think today, at the beginning, you talk about the prices, the fluctuation. I think there are two things. When Binance first started only 5 years ago, actually BTC is only $500. Today, yes, the price has been halved compared with last month, but compared with where 5 years ago, it's still a great investment. You have to have a longer horizon looking at actually the development trend. But there's also even underlying why actually we're in here today. I think that we need to think about the human nature. Human has been searching for a good society since even Aristotle days. But look at the world today. I think you're talking about the prices. I think when we talk about financial recession, it's very easy to quantify. But today, in my personal opinion, we're in a geopolitical recession because of human nature. Whether it's a communist, a socialism or capitalism, they all started with a good intention actually to finding a good model of governance. But what went wrong actually is the human nature went wrong. Because good people, when they started getting power, things started to go wrong. So we are actually in human nature. We are in a year, we have to find a certain way to complement actually us. This is how technology come in. Behind actually blockchain, crypto, even NFT, there's a new mechanism, more transparent, more disciplined, going to actually making the process more transparent, adding more discipline into the governance. This is the fundamental why actually talking about, even though there's a lot of maybe NFT is very speculative, but the fundamental layer is very solid.
I have to say I was not expecting to end this on a Hobbesian note. So I think we shall, yes. I think as a kind of a closing question, this got very philosophical very quickly. But as a closing question, I want to ask each of you, you've come up that space in very different ways, and you have positions that are not necessarily what I would describe as like mainstream in various ways. What is one thing that you consistently confront that is a misunderstanding of the work that you are doing that you would, if you could wave a magic wand, change?
You're looking at me, so I'm going to start. So I think we, in the NFT community, we have this joke, right click, save as, where people will constantly say, I could just take a screenshot of your Bored Ape or your CryptoPunk, and now I have it, haha. Okay, so one thing that I think is incredibly important as a sort of conceptual shift in the minds of the mainstream is understanding why digital asset ownership matters. So if I had a magic wand, I wish I could instill that in the minds of many.
Are you secretly a copyright lawyer?
Potentially, but I couldn't tell you. It's a secret.
Helen?
For me, I still think we're in the year of technology looking for applications. So what is most important? Successful cases. Because that's the best way to bring inspiration, leadership, and confidence into the society. So this is actually how Binance, we position ourselves, trying to actually set up and also to encourage, to nurture more successful cases to really change the landscape of the industry. And this is something I love to see more, actually, to how we can support more successful cases, going forward to change the future, to really creating genuine values to the society.
Well, I think, just touching on the topic of art and speculation and stuff, I think that one of the common, misconceptions is that, well, I think actually one of them is, first of all, that this technology, I feel like artists get a lot of flack for using, NFTs, and then immediately we get attacked for saying, oh, well, this is bad for the environment and things like that. But, I think at the end of the day, there's a saying in crypto that's DYOR, stands for do your own research. And I think that there's a lot of misinformation that's being spread out there, and that you should always sort of, do your own due diligence and look into what are the actual environmental impacts and see what you are comfortable with. And, for example, eating meat is extremely bad for the environment, but nobody's getting attacked for, and I feel like, you would never go to, or if people say an artist sells out because they start selling NFTs, it's because it's more efficient and they're trying to make a living for themselves, right? If you wouldn't go to a flea market to somebody who's selling crafts at an arts fair and say, you're a bad person for, making a living for yourself. So why should it be any different on the digital world? And I hope that that kind of, thinking changes as well.
In a session before this one, Jack Mallory of Strike was saying that, nobody's asking you to hand wash your clothes. Like, why are you saying that energy usage is negative? I think the challenge is lots of people are saying that energy usage is negative, and that, just to your point about eating meat, there's this increasing awareness of, it's like 40 degrees Celsius in London this weekend. So there's this increasing awareness that everything that we're doing, particularly if we're coming at it from something that's supposed to make people's lives better, that has consequences. And, so just kind of as a closing thought, what about NFTs, what about these conversations about the environment and the ecosystems, have to actually change in order to better address these pretty robust criticisms?
Maybe I will start with two things, regulation and education. Those are actually the most important thing. Actually, we really think actually the regulation is actually going to bring more successful fruition for the whole industry. So actually in Binance, particularly since last year, we actively work with regulators around the globe, trying to develop the right regulation to ourselves and also to shape the whole society, because that's actually, if we believe in the society, we need to bring the whole penetration rate, going up. So that's very important. And education is very important. I think today there's so much FOMO. A lot of people lost money because of FOMO, because people don't really understand the underlying substance. So it's very important actually to do the right education, particularly with the youth. And this is something we also committed on the charity side, 100 million actually for the global fund, working with various universities to developing schemes, to educate the youth and also for the job creation. I think those two things are very close to our heart.